morning, at least from the. So you may have read the profile. Just to summarize, I was the former headmaster of a primary school for 25 years in London. I helped found that school. I'm now an educational consultant, so I work for an educational trust and I devise and design a life coaching program for teenagers. I'm also the founder of Pro Parent, so this organization that basically involves me going around the whole of the UK and Ireland, talking to couples, families. I do some counseling. So on a whole range of topics relating to relationships and to upbringing. I'm also a Radio Maria presenter, so I have my Radio Maria weekly show as well. You can find my podcast on Spotify, so if you tap in Pro Parent, so there are lots of podcasts there. And then I'm also father of 7, very importantly. So I've been married to my wife Caroline for 30 years. So we have 7 children, 2 of them married, and one of them getting married, my daughter, in a month's time or so, and all of them grown up now as adults, so I have time to do things like this. Okay, so let's begin. Well, a priest once asked some primary school children, if you can tell me what Jesus said about marriage. And the children looked at the ceiling and the floor, and then one little child said, oh, pick me. And the priest said, yes, what did Jesus teach about marriage? And he said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. It was a great answer, because when it comes to marriage, many people in the world we live in really don't know what they do. So today I'm going to cover the talk in 2 parts, and in fact, based on what Stefan was saying, we'll maybe get to the end of the first part, where I'm going to look at the general principles of fidelity in marriage, and that should approximately take us about half an hour or so. And then if you would like to have a pause, and then the next part of the talk is a practical one, when we consider how we can maintain that fidelity in marriage in very practical ways, really. Well, perhaps one of the reasons why marriage is facing so many challenges with declining rates, as we heard earlier, especially among millennials, is that now most children today, studies are showing, that have more than 1 in 3 chance of not living with both birth parents by the age of 15, really. And sadly, children are now more likely to have a smartphone at home than a father, right? And so it's not surprising, therefore, that in this climate, marriage rates are going to decline. It's also true that people are increasingly getting married later in life. The average is now between 27 and 29, at least in the Western world, and even higher in major cities. And this trend can also be observed, within Catholic Christian marriages. And for many, this delay in getting married, or sometimes a decision not to get married at all, is rooted in this fear of making a definitive choice, preferring to keep possibilities open for as long as possible. Many express this desire to get married eventually, but the reality is that barely half of today's teenagers will actually get married, as they often feel that they need to prioritize other goals. So, for example, building their career or achieving some kind of financial stability. We all understand the pressures that make young people want to keep their options open. However, it's important to remind our own children and other young people that we come across that any meaningful commitment in the real world involves making decisions. And in fact, the word decision itself derives from the Latin verb decidere, which means to cut off. It means actually to cut off. And it emphasizes choosing one path and letting go of others. So saying no to one option in order to say yes to another. And we recognize that this kind of decidere, this kind of choice, can sometimes be painful, and can lead to feelings of hurt or maybe regret over paths that haven't been taken. But this, we teach our children, is part of life. Yeah, we have to make choices. And we recognize that when we make these choices, these important choices, they will involve some degree of sacrifice. Yeah. And for me, this concept of decidere links really well with this idea of fidelity, right? Fidelity. And fides in Latin means faith, trust, loyalty. Fidelity is essential in marriage. You know, just as the initial decision to marry represents a commitment to one path, yeah, fidelity. You know, fidelity, this unwavering loyalty and faithfulness
Ang
within
academic files,
marriage
laging sarili ang
requires
kulang ko na
this.
lang dyan, flashcards.
Sorry, just to.
Napunto ba lang?
Sorry, please mute everyone. Sorry, please mute everyone.
Thank you.
Joining. Hello, please.
Thank you very much. So this concept, as I say, closely links with this idea of fidelity. And fidelity, as I say, is essential in marriage. And you know, just as this initial decision to marry represents a commitment to one path, fidelity, this unwavering loyalty and faithfulness within marriage, it requires a continuous reaffirmation of this decision. You know, it means on a practical level, actively choosing your spouse day after day, right? Day after day, choosing them, you know, making that decision. But fidelity in marriage brings many benefits on a natural level. You know, there's extensive research recognizing the significant benefits it brings to individuals and to society as a whole. You know, studies by leading family scholars, institutions like the Marriage Foundation in the West, you know, present strong evidence, for example, that marriage fosters high quality relationships between adults, but also between parents and their children. Yeah, that children raised in stable and married parent households tend to have better educational attainment, better emotional well-being, and greater social success later on in life. That married couples experience better health and lower illness rates. They tend to build more wealth on average than singles or cohabitating couples. But there are other interesting findings too. You know? Throughout human history, sociologists have found that marriage has been a virtually universal institution with remarkably consistent, with a understanding across all cultures and faiths, really. So, in other words, you know, what we've understood to be marriage, or what generations have understood to be marriage, has been remarkably consistent throughout history in all cultures and throughout all sorts of faiths, really. And this remained true. This natural understanding of marriage remained true until the last 5 minutes of human history. You know, you can find evidence of a natural understanding of marriage in the Bible, in the Song of Songs, the story of Ruth, you know, throughout the Old Testament and in lots of ancient writings, really. Yet today, the definition of marriage, as I say, in the last 5 minutes of human history, has become much more fluid. You know, it's whatever two people think it is, and the government of the day approves. You know, and this is in stark contrast to the view that our ancestors held, as I say, right across all faiths. And so, what I thought we'd do really is really establish this classical definition of marriage before we continue. And you know, what has been true throughout human history. And this definition of marriage has 3 essential components. Okay, so number 1, marriage is a lifelong communion of a husband and a wife established by their free consent. So free consent, that's the second part of this definition. And the third element, for the sake of the generation and education of children. Right, so these are the 3 elements that have defined the natural understanding of human marriage. So marriage is a lifelong communion between a husband and a wife established by their free consent for the sake of the generation and education of children. And it's this third part, the purpose of marriage, which is something, you know, that our ancestors understood much better than we do. Right? So for the generation education of children. So we're just going to look at 1 or 2 of these elements. I say the second part of the talk is going to be much more practical. For this one, I just want to look at some important principles, if that's okay. So let's look at the first bit here. The first element, communion between a husband and a wife. Now, what does that mean? Well, you may recall that at the wedding feast of Cana, the best wine was served later in the ceremony, thanks to the miracle of Christ. And similarly, after many years of practicing communion, I'll get back to that in a moment, couples, I've seen, can experience this second wind, this second wine, if you like, a happiness and an intimacy far richer than anything that they experienced on their wedding day. So when couples practice this communion over time, they when they get to the point where their kids are old enough to go to university and so on, they can look across the table at each other and see this deep connection, this deep love, really, this rich intimacy, because they've been practicing this communion over the course of many years. And what do we mean by communion? Well, one way of looking at this is to think about the difference between communion and a word that's very similar to it, community. So just to look at the differences between the two. Now, a community is where a multitude of persons come together, like a sports club, a gym, where everyone is striving for a common goal. So for example, now I'm a Chelsea fan, so I don't know how many people follow football, but I'm a Chelsea fan, and I occasionally go with my son to watch Chelsea play. And when I sit next to this very large chap who looks a little bit scary, it has to be said, he's got lots of tattoos and so on, and I rarely speak to him. I'm just too frightened to say anything to him. And occasionally Chelsea will score, very rarely nowadays for anybody who follows English football. But when they score, we both jump up. We both jump up into the air, right? And for a brief moment, we look at each other with happiness and joy, and then we sit down and stop looking at each other and so on. But for a brief moment, we've experienced a community relationship because we've had a shared goal, and the shared goal has been to watch our team win or to watch our team score a goal. That's a community. Right? That's a community. But I'm not in communion with that person. I might be sharing a community spirit, but I'm not in communion with it. And why? Because a communion is completely different. It's where a multitude of persons come together, somehow live the life of the other person, to basically have the best moral good in mind for the other person. So they're sharing this life where each has the best interests of the other at heart, morally, spiritually. Yeah? So friendship be a communion, a family is a communion, a marriage, most certainly a communion. Yeah. So in each case of communion, there is unity of life, good for the other person. And essentially communion is what human beings are made for. Yeah. So community is fine, but we were made for communion. And in marriage, communion is very importantly for the good of the spouses, but also for their offspring. Yeah, because in fact, as a former headmaster, as I was saying before, 25 years, I know that when parents are not involved in this communion with one another, children suffer greatly. They suffer greatly. And so when we think about our marriages, remember an important, essential element is, as I say, to live in communion with our spouse. We'll come back to this later, practically, how to do this. But for now, I want to establish some principles. As I say, we're not simply aiming to share some kind of goals with them. How many couples nowadays just live in community? They live in the same house. They share some goals together, like raising the kids, bringing them to school, making money, having holidays. But they're just they live in a community spirit. They're not in communion with one another. Living in communion means to live a relationship of fides, of fidelity, of faith, trust, loyalty. Because we want first to communion. We want our spouse's best long-term good. the purpose of marriage, the third element. Remember I said to you that the third element is the generation and education of children. But why do most people get married today? Yeah. Well, for some, it's money. Or they get married because their mum and dad are leaning on them. Right? You know, they're getting a little bit old, and so mum and dad say, "Look, come on, hurry up! You need to get married." And so they panic a little bit and go down that route. For others, I would say, at least in the West, they get married because they want to be personally fulfilled. Right? It's about personal happiness, emotional fulfillment. Right? In my inner nirvana, I want to feel happy. Right? And indeed, look, the motive, this is very important, the motive for getting married may well be love. Right? And in fact, for most people it is. And I hope that for many of you, this was the reason, right? The motive for getting married, married is love. Love is what makes a marriage good. Absolutely, love should be in marriage. But love is not the purpose of marriage. That's the difference between the motive and the purpose. If the purpose of marriage was simply to feel loved, and then we stop loving, well, then we move on and we find another spouse. If that was the purpose of marriage, you know, we just dispose of them, as it were. You know, we've like a bit like a disposable marriage. You know, Pope Francis often talks about this throwaway culture. You know, the culture of people being disposable, and this is a dangerous mindset. You know, because what happens in this culture is that we treat each other as consumer goods. Yeah.
Haijatokea, ila wewe pana kuhusu kesho maungamo.
Sorry, everyone.
So
Please mute yourself. Hello, please mute yourself. Please mute yourself.
Thank you.
Eh?
So we treat each other as disposable goods, consumer goods. Yeah. So when this person no longer satisfies me, when this person no longer makes me happy, if that were the purpose of marriage, then I walk out. I walk out. Now, so as I said before, I'm not suggesting love isn't important. Love is necessary to function, for a family to function well. Of course it is, and we'll come back to it, as I say, in the practical session. Love is the oil that greases the machine. Yeah. And of course, it's not to say that emotions and feelings don't play important roles in family life. Of course they do. But love is first and foremost an act of the will. Right? It's not, at least in its highest form, an emotion or a feeling, yeah, which kind of ebbs and flows. Yeah. Love is a decision. We come back to this word decidere, to cut off, decide. And it's a decision that requires cutting off from other choices. It requires sacrifice. Yeah? So in other words, what I'm saying is that we can decide to love our spouse. We can decide as an act of the will, regardless of how we feel about them from time to time. So maybe our feelings towards our spouse may not always be loving feelings. Doesn't matter. We can decide through an act of the will to love them, because that's the highest form of love. Yeah. And while love is essential in marriage for the communion of spouses, as I mentioned, it's primarily there for the purpose of marriage, for the sake of raising children. Yeah. You know, the core purpose of marriage as a universal human institution has always been to attach mothers and fathers to their children, and obviously also to attach themselves to one another. Yeah. So individuals may have various reasons for getting married, but the intrinsic purpose of marriage remains the generation and education of children. So to summarize what I want to say here, it's important not to confuse the motivations for marriage, so why people choose to enter it, with the intrinsic purpose of marriage. Yeah. But sadly, at least in the West, you know, the concept of the wider family unit has completely shrunk. And often it just leaves the couple at its core. Yeah. It's so vastly different to the ancient world, where having children wasn't necessarily a lifestyle choice. You know, our ancestors, becoming a parent was essentially for the preservation of the elder and society as a whole, right? And it just simply wasn't questioned. You know, parents understood their obligation to raise their children with the expectation that those children would in turn look after them in their old age. I mean, it was absolutely essential. Yeah. And moreover, the other thing was that the ancients, and I'm not talking here about religion, I'm just talking here about our ancestors from across all the different cultures. You know, they understood that marriage transcended this arrangement between two individuals. Yeah. It was a union of the extended families established for the greater good of society. You know, this Hollywood romantic love idea between a husband and a wife, which is idealized as the ultimate goal of marriage, is a modern concept. It's not something that our ancestors would have understood. They would have laughed at us, really, in that sense. You know, they just wouldn't have understood it. Yeah. Someone once said, and I'm not sure who said it, but whoever said it, you know, was displaying, you know, really profound wisdom. They said this: when I say I do at the altar, I landed on the shores of a foreign country and I burnt the ships. I'm not going back. Wow. You know, I landed on the shores of a foreign country and I burnt the ships. I'm not going back. Now, this is how marriage was always understood, is fidelity, right? Today's reality is different. And if one person changes their mind, the government, at least again in where I come from, will side with the person who wants the marriage the least. Yeah. And this leaves couples in a much more vulnerable position than in previous generations. Yeah. Much more vulnerable. So why is fidelity understood as permanence and exclusivity and dissolubility? Why is it so important in marriage? Yeah. Well, I've hinted at this several times. At a fundamental level, children have a right to know who they are. You know, they have a right to understand their personal identity. They have a right to receive the love and have a relationship with both their biological mother and father, right? And as I've hinted at, this is just for their own well-being, although that's crucially important, but it's also essential for the good of society as a whole. Yeah. And marriage, and I've seen this over 25 years of being ahead and 30 years of being an educationist, that marriage is the adult institution best designed to deliver this stability for children. Right? And also, if marriage wasn't permanent, just think about the mindset of the couples walking down the aisle. It would be completely different. Yeah, they might think, well, I can always get out of this if it doesn't work. If the other person doesn't make me happy, we go back to this idea of happy, I can just walk out. And so this lack of commitment would completely change the way we behaved in marriage. Completely. Yeah. Because if we enter marriage with 1 foot, 1 foot out of the door, then we're less likely to invest ourselves in our spouse through those inevitable challenges that are going to come in our marriage. Yeah. So we're not going to invest if we think we can get out, and that leaves our spouses vulnerable, right? It leaves us, if that were the mindset. The idea that this is a permanent union is what supports and encourages us to make sacrifices in marriage, right? Because we know it's indissoluble. Next we turn, so still thinking about 1 or 2 principles, and then maybe, Stefan, we can have a break in a short while. We turn to this idea of the sacrament of marriage, the Christian understanding of marriage as a sacrament. So this idea of the sacrament builds on this natural understanding of marriage, which is what I've been sharing with you up until now. It's just another layer. That's all. It just kind of elevates the human understanding of marriage. And I appreciate that maybe not everybody here today is a Christian, but I hope that the following insights will help everybody understand the institution of marriage a little bit more deeply. Yeah. So what can I say about marriage in the church? Well, as I mentioned already, a great principle of Christian teaching is that grace builds upon nature. Right? So it's, sacrament elevates this natural understanding of marriage, really, that has, that started with Adam and Eve. And as I said, we've already talked about the marriage in the natural sense, the bonding, the love, family, all those aspects. And the church, basically, it says, that's great, but then it goes a step further, and grace takes that natural foundation and elevates it into a supernatural reality. As St. Paul said, marriage becomes a reflection of Christ's love for his church. So when we exchange our vows at the altar, God is taking this naturally good thing, right? This naturally good thing, marriage, and is lifting it to a supernatural context. And so from that moment on, all aspects of our married life, the joy of having children, the intimacy of the sexual embrace, our daily loving relationship, the challenges, the sacrifices, all of those things from that moment become a foretaste of the union that we're going to experience with Christ in heaven. All of those things become a foretaste of that union. And it's amazing, it's mind-blowing when you think about it, really. So marriage isn't just about finding psychological fulfillment in each other, which is a good thing, as I keep saying, from a human level. But it's also finding a path to salvation within it, within our marriage. Now, God's calling, not just the physical attraction between a man and a woman, is what brings the couple together. Yeah. And then knowing that marriage is a mirror of this heavenly joy, this foretaste of heaven that we're going to experience. It makes all the sacrifices that we encounter, worth working through, those daily struggles. It makes it worth it, when we know that the reward is so great. And it can be a powerful motivator to keep the marriage strong and a couple working together as a team, knowing that this is the goal that we're working towards. I mean, when I first got married, so I've been married, as I say, 30 years, I remember hearing in an early homily from a priest this idea of helping my wife to become a saint that she was created to be. And initially my reaction was, wow, that's putting a lot of pressure on me, and also on her, really, to become saints. The divorce rate is high enough as it is, without couples that, being expected to help each other become saints. Big pressure. But it's worth remembering that being a saint and helping our spouse to become a saint is nothing other than putting Christ at the center of our lives, to become people that Christ wants us to be. That's what it is. Yeah. It doesn't have to be dramatic, like leaving everything to become a Trappist monk, or going to Calcutta to care for the poor, or anything like that. It doesn't mean that. It means what my wife expects of me, what I expect of her, that we help each other to live the kind of life that Christ wants us to live, and the kind of friendship that he wants us to have with him, really. And church understands that this institution of marriage isn't easy, which is why we need the graces bestowed by the sacrament. Yeah. So a key effect of the sacrament is to strengthen the love between spouses. We need those graces, where they receive the grace to patiently bear with each other's faults, to accept each other's limitations, and then simultaneously to help each other grow in holiness, really. Always wanting, as I said before, best for each other, both morally and spiritually. You may have heard of Fulton Sheen, and he wrote this wonderful book called 3 to Get Married. And in that book, he makes the case that when two in marriage fall in love with a third, Christ, their love and intimacy intensifies. Because without the third, love becomes self-involved and egoistical. Yeah. I mean, Aristotle talked about this, obviously not in relation to Christ, but he always says that in a friendship, there has to be a third element. There's got to be something we have in common, maybe a hobby, or some love, or some desire, or some interest. Because otherwise, it just becomes inward-looking. That friendship becomes egoistical. There's got to be a third. There's got to be something else. And this also relates to children as well, really. I mean, obviously, sometimes I'm not going to get into it today. Sometimes couples cannot have children, and that's a grace that God sends them as well. That's also a blessing, right? Because He has another plan for them, another mission for them. So the third, for that couple who can't have children, is Christ and the vocation that He gives them. But that third in marriage, so important. And then, the sacrament also, as I keep talking about, helps us to raise those children, the education, the generation education of children. Because let's be honest, raising children in a Christian way is incredibly difficult nowadays, and that's the topic for another talk. Very, very challenging. Yeah, and we need the grace. Yeah, it's hard enough as it is. And what the sacrament does is help the family become a school of virtue, where children can be guided towards holiness and helped to become the great people that God wants them to be, that He created them to be. Yeah. So let's conclude this first part of the talk by turning to Humanae Vitae, right? So, and then that's it. I'm not going to be talking any more religion after this. But this is an encyclical written by Pope Paul VI, and it just kind of summarizes everything that I've said until now. And these are, I'd say, these insights apply to those of you who are non-Christian as well. And basically, there are 4 essential properties in marriage. This, as I said, that I've been trying. And so the first thing, number 1, says Pope Paul VI, that marriage is human. Right? Marriage is between human beings with both bodies and souls. Yeah? Our physicality matters, and we must take care of this aspect of our marriage. We're not angels, right? We have bodies, and so therefore we need to look after that side of our marriage, the physicality of it. And here I'm not talking about just the sexual embrace here. Obviously, I'm talking about the fact that we give ourselves body and soul in marriage, right? So it's human. Number 2, says the Pope, it's total. Marriage involves giving ourselves completely to another. This demands exclusivity, because that's the nature of love, right? That's the nature of love, exclusivity. And think of Christ and His bride, the church. Thirdly, says the Pope, it's permanent. It's permanent. Love is enduring. That's why the marriage vows include the phrase, as long as we both shall live, right? Permanent. And the 4th property that the Pope talks about is that marriage is fruitful, that marriage is linked to life. We can't truly love our spouse without also loving their potential as a parent. Yeah, even if we can't have children, but their potential as a parent. So because marriage naturally opens up to the possibility of children. Human, total, permanent, fruitful. And with that, I think we can pause, Stefan.
Beautiful, Ciro. Thank you so much. I think this is both refreshing and also enlightening on all these faculties, properties of marriage that you just mentioned. I wanted to check from everyone. If you have any question, you are free to unmute yourself and then state your name and from which country you are from, and then you ask the questions. Or you can have it in the chat. I can read for you. Anyone? Sorry, please mute. If you don't ask any question, please mute yourself. Okay,
I think I wonder, Stefan, because the second part of the talk is going to be a lot more practical, and that may also result in people having questions, because it's much more practical.
But Ciro, I have a burning question here, because you mentioned a very interesting aspect of marriage, which is you mentioned that love is the oil of the marriage.
Yes.
And I would say yes. That if love is the oil, and probably the glue is this commitment, the fidelity. And I think I just want to have your advice for myself and for other people who are married, that sometimes we tend to see marriage, as something, because it's love is something positive. We look at the happy side. But in reality, there are a lot of sacrifices that we have to make towards each other also. Love is not only, to me, it's not only, I'll give you what you need and you give me what I need, rather than I'll give you my all and you give me your all. And when I give my all, there's a lot of sacrifice, also sufferings that I need to do to give myself 100% to my wife. So what is your advice about this missing things that a lot of couples experience on thinking about that sacrifice, suffering is part of the marriages, and this is not only happy things, but sacrifices many times also an oil of our binding of marriage.
Oh, this is such a good question, really, Stefan. And I mean, let me answer that question a little bit by kind of setting up a little bit of context, really. We must remember that God is God, you are not God, and neither is your spouse. And why is this important? Because so often we put unrealistic expectations on our spouses for this kind of perfect understanding or perfect response, really. And of course, if your spouse inspires you to holiness in you, that's great. Right? That's great. But point here, and this touches upon what you're saying, really, Stefan, even if your spouse is challenging in some way, because we're imperfect beings, really. We carry a lot of baggage with us, and that even that situation where our spouse might be challenging can become a path to holiness. Yeah. Because sooner or later, often, I mean, I've got two kids who, as I said before, who are married, and another one who's getting married soon. And I've told them each time that by the end of the first day of the honeymoon, maybe as soon as they get married, they'll realize that their spouse is also to some extent their cross, right? Because when we enter into that relationship with somebody who's not God, who's not perfect in that way, then we're going to understand that over time this person is our path to holiness. But that also means carrying the cross that they also bring with them as well, and for us, yeah. But we should encourage them. We should encourage couples, as I've encouraged my children, to remember that whatever cross God permits, whatever cross he permits, it can be offered by them for their spouse's sanctification and theirs. This is what we mean by redemptive suffering. Yeah, redemptive suffering. It's to love one's spouse like Christ loves the church. Yeah, and this redemptive suffering is the highest form of love. Because I would often talk to my kids about this redemptive sacrificial love as being not based on your feelings, right? I mean, all of you out there, who wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to kind of change nappies and to, all the sacrifices you make for your kids. We don't feel like doing those things. At least I didn't feel like doing those things, but you do them. You do them because you. Thank you. You do that because out of love and this desire to sacrifice yourself for your children, right? Because you have their long-term best interests at heart. So yes, we are going to face challenges in our marriage. We're going to face crosses in our marriages, but we can transform these crosses for the best of our spouses and also for our best as well, really. Yeah. I hope that helps, Stefan.
Yes. In fact, a holy priest advised me more than 20 years ago, before I got married myself, that with my wife, that Stefan, there are not only 2 rings in marriage, but 4 rings. So I asked him, what are these 4 rings? Well, you have an engagement ring, you are now into wedding rings, but don't forget there are the 3rd one, which is suffering, the ring of suffering.
Yes.
And then what about the 4th one? Well, this is very important, the 4th one. You have to enduring. the ring of enduring, so forever. So what a beautiful advice, jokingly. So carry on, Ciro.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. No, and you reminded me really, Stefan, that's why enduring, you know, I like that fourth ring, is that therefore tensions or conflicts within the marriage should never therefore trigger a spiritual crisis in us. Yeah. Because sometimes what I see is that couples, you know, when their spouse is suffering, you know, there are crosses in marriage, they think, oh well, you know, I kind of blame God, or I, you know, whatever it might be, and it causes a spiritual crisis in their lives, and they stop praying, they stop frequenting the sacraments, they become bitter, really. No, when these crosses appear, you know, your fourth ring, Stefan, enduring, in these moments, we need to be even more focused on our own holiness and plan of life if we're going to help our spouse. So I always, you know, remind couples that in these times of difficulties, you need to be strong individually, right? So you need to pray more than you've ever prayed before. You need to be really close to God so that you can help your spouse through her or through his particular cross, really, and never neglect your spiritual life and looking after your spiritual life in these moments, because, you know, we're body and soul unity. We're body and soul unity. We need to be looking after our bodies. We need to be looking after our souls, really, and especially when we're confronting, you know, that's the only these challenges. That's the only way we can endure, in my view. Yeah. Okay, Stefan. What would you like to do? Do you want to pour through more questions, or shall we carry on?
You can carry on to the practical aspects.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Oh,
yes.
hello. Is it Liz? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Liz Waweru, and I'm talking from Nairobi, Kenya.
Hello, Liz.
And my question, hi, thank you so much for the talk, very enlightening. And my question is about the element of what you're saying, being body and soul, in terms of bringing your body and your soul in the marriage. And I know you've talked about how you need to take care of your spiritual life to take care of the soul part of your body. I was just curious about the physical part. I know you've said in terms of you need to be very careful, or just, you know, aware that two bodies also coming in. And I was just curious, and I don't know if that's what you're going to cover in the practical side of things.
Exactly that. Yes.
So maybe I'm preempting what I
Don't
should
worry.
just wait to listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe that's just what I wanted, a bit of the expounding on that
Liz.
section. But if you cover
Thank
that
you.
in the practical side of things, it's okay.
Yes. No,
I'll
Liz,
wait.
thank you. Great question. Great question. And so everything I'm going to talk about now is all about the body side of things, really. So in other words,
Okay.
no, thank you. That's such an insightful question. And because I want to do the question justice, I'm just going to go through the different elements of it. And hopefully by the end, that would have answered your question. But Liz, come back to me afterwards if you've got any particular questions. But that's what I'm going to turn my attention to right now. So thank you so much for raising that.
Thank you. All right, I'll listen.
Thank you. So so here's the key, and it really kind of touches upon what Liz has been asking, really, that, you know, long married couples, when asked about the secrets of their lasting relationship, yeah, typically answer, we've learned to accept who the other is. That to me is very, and we'll break this down, and it's very, very deep, really. I remember asking this question of my parents who'd been married for 50 years. And my mother, when I answered this question, she didn't say when, you know, when I asked them, what is this, you know, how is it that they've been successfully married for so long? She didn't say, oh, because your father is just this wonderful romantic, right? Somebody who over the 50 years was able to kind of shower me with flowers and you know, all sorts of kind of romantic things, really. No. She said that the secret to their 50-year-long happy marriage was to learn to accept who the other is. And it does touch upon the physical human element, and I'm going to unpack this. Now, this doesn't mean giving in to manipulation or demands. I'm not talking about that. What we're talking about here is those harmless quirks that make us unique. Yeah. Maybe it's their spouse's obsession with neatly folded socks, their odd sense of humor, their insistence always being 15 minutes early. Now, over time, these couples, these happy, successful couples, they realize that these quirks weren't worth the constant battles and might even become enduring over time. Right? And look, with this, with the human element of it, I just want to introduce this idea of the 1% drift. 1% drift. And the 1% drift is this idea that subtle changes in our relationship habits over time can erode that fidelity. It's 1% drift. Let me give you this powerful analogy of how insignificant habits, perhaps over time, can cause problems, really. So imagine a plane taking off for a long flight. Yeah? So as it takes off, you know, it seems to be going in the right trajectory. But then if it's off by just 1%, so you don't see that at first, you don't see it, but over time, that 1% drift, if you like, over the length of a long flight means that that plane is going to land hundreds of miles away from its intended destination. Yeah? And the same is true in marriage. You know, seemingly minor issues, sometimes, you know, could be bigger issues, but from my experience, you know, when I look at couples over the years who have divorced, it's not necessary. I mean, in the most, at least in terms of my experiences ahead, it's not been because of affairs and, you know, big things like that. Sometimes it has been because of that, but more often than not, is this creeping separateness that happens within the marriage, right? It's 1% drift, right? Persistent lateness, lack of virtue, you know, procrastination with chores, etc., etc. These things over time create all you know, these problems, and these bad habits. They begin to create friction that slowly push the couples apart, really. And so, you know, in fact, the Marriage Foundation found that over a third of divorced spouses, you know, they cite drifting apart as the primary reason. But I think it could be, my practical kind of observations anecdotally is that it's even higher than that. Yeah. So let's be clear. I'm not talking here about marriages facing serious difficulties like mental health issues, abuse, or other challenges that require professional help. That's different, right? This is not what today's talk is about. You know, they require a different approach. What I'm talking about here is the problem of creeping separateness, let's say, and how couples can actively address that 1% drift, which is really at the heart of your question, Liz. I'm going to kind of I'm getting to really, and fundamentally they do this. They address this 1% drift by becoming aware of these relationship habits, identifying them when they start to creep in, and consciously choosing to replace those bad or poor relationship habits with good relationship habits, healthier ones. Right? This is what successful couples, in my view, and I've seen thousands of successful couples over the years in the work that I do, and as I mentioned before, I counsel a number of couples as well, is to help them replace those poor, bad relationship habits with good, healthy relationship habits. And also my work with when I counsel couples. And so some of you may have received counseling and whatever. So I don't want to, please, I'm not being, you know, kind of negative about anything that you may have received or heard or whatever. But when I counsel couples, what I do is I focus primarily on what makes the relationship good, right? Which is friendship. Right? Friendship is absolutely key to all of this, really, because often that 1% drift is because the friendship that they had maybe when they got married has started to kind of drift. And many people, many counselors will talk about communication strategies, conflict avoidance strategies, and all of the, and I cover some of these things in the work that I do, right? But it's not my key perspective, because if you can focus on what makes the relationship good, friendship, and so there are many things that I get the couple do to kind of establish that reignite that friendship, then all the other stuff will look after itself. Right? All the other stuff look after itself, rather than focusing on the communication strategies. You know, in my view, the problem at the human level between couples is not because they don't know how to communicate. It's not communication strategies. It's because they've lost their friendship, or that needs to be reinforced, really. So moving on with that idea, what I try and do is encourage couples to develop this this positive mindset based on friendship, really. And so number one is that we need to create an atmosphere in our homes, in our relationship, where appreciation and respect play a natural part of everyday life. Those big and small gestures, a simple thank you for picking up the laundry, or thank you for doing the dishes. When it's even if it's your turn to do the dishes, you might think, well, why should I thank him or thank her for doing something which is their job, right? Set that thought aside. Yeah. You know, I tell tell couples now, the four pillars of human civilization: please, thank you, sorry, I give you my word, I stick to it. Yeah. So when I say I do something, I'm going to do it. These are the four pillars. These four pillars have to be part of our relationship, and we need to work on that if that's not what is present in the relationship. Expressing gratitude, what it does, it builds goodwill and makes the other spouse feel valued. You know, I'm not a trained psychologist. Everything I share with you today is just my observations over the years, 30 years of being an educationist. But I didn't need to be a psychologist to know, when couples came to see me at the school, which were the couples who were going to have long, happy marriages and the ones that were heading for disaster. And why? Because I could just see the little interactions between them. So they would come along, they would sit on the other side of my desk. Maybe the school secretary would bring in some coffee and refreshments and so on and so forth. And those couples who'd been married for 10, 15 years, however long, really, you know, they were looking little things. They were pouring a tea or coffee and giving it to the other spouse, and the other one was saying thank you. They were looking out for each other. Thank you, please. All these little things were present in that little exchange over a cup of coffee, which is nothing. And yet, how many times did I see couples where none of that kind of refinement, none of that refinement was there? These couples got used to each other, right? This kind of complacency had crept in. And then maybe the wife would start to talk about the problem she had with one of the children. And the father would come in and say, look, thank you very much, dearest wife. You know, I will tell Mr. Candia what the real problem is here. So in other words, look, you know, I'm the one who's in charge here, really. And you know, I'll talk to Mr. Candia man to man. Thank you very much. You know, this is all. These couples were heading for, if not disaster in terms of divorce, these were unhappy marriages, and it was so clear to me. Right? So clear to me. You know, so expressing gratitude, you know, making the point of noticing and verbally affirming the positive. Phrases like, you know, I really enjoyed that conversation over dinner. You know, watching you play with the baby last night really warmed my heart. Yeah. Or I'm really proud of you. Yeah. You know, and this supports, you know, this kind of supportive environment. And so this culture of respect comes from a conscious habit to change. You know, the first I used to say to people that there's a reason why a headmaster is called a headmaster, because, you know, the biggest problem, you know, most of it happens in your head, right? So you need to kind of change what's happening in your head in order to kind of carry out the right kind of actions. And I'm going to get back to that in a moment. So instead of scanning the environment for things to criticize with your spouse, successful couples, in my view, they train themselves to look for things to praise and appreciate. This shift in focus from, as I say, you know, from criticizing to praising makes a huge difference in how they interact and how they strengthen their marital bond. You know, I mean, someone said the most important 4 words for a successful marriage: I'll do the dishes, even if it's not your turn to do the dishes. Now, you want a successful marriage? You know, I'll do the dishes. 4 words when it's not even your turn to do it. You may have come across the work of, and he is a kind of a qualified psychologist, the work of somebody called Dr. John Gottman, and I encourage you to look at his work. And he was a renowned relationship researcher, and he carried out lots of research in the 90s on couples in kind of lab conditions to see how they interacted with each other. And he wanted to kind of explore this idea, you know, can I predict, you know, who are going to be successful, which couples are going to be successful, and can I predict those who are heading for divorce, really? So this was the kind of the idea behind of his research. And he showed that a ratio of 5-to-1 is crucial for successful relationships, 5-to-1. So this means that for every one negative interaction, so one negative interaction, there have to be 5 positive ones in order to maintain a healthy relationship. So think of it like this. If you say or do something hurtful to your spouse, making up for that one negative, something that you said or done, with just one positive isn't enough. It's not enough. To truly counterbalance the negativity, you need 5 positive action statements. You know, that's what you need. And I've always found this research really interesting because it's not one-to-one. Right? It's not one-to-one. You might think, well, you know, if I do something negative, I just need to do one positive thing to make up for it. You know, that's not enough, right? Because the negative in a marriage is disproportionate, highly disproportionate to the positive. It's 5-to-1. You know, and so, you know, Dr. Gottman's research found, in fact, that couples with a 1-to-1 ratio, so one positive for one negative, were heading for divorce. Right? I find this amazing. So in other words, even for those couples heading for divorce, it wasn't that there was no positivity in the marriage. It's just that there wasn't enough. Yeah, because the positive needs to kind of, you know, drown the negative, really. Now, listen, I'm not saying, and neither was Dr. John Gottman saying, that you need to keep a count, right? So in other words, you've done one negative thing, and then you've got to go around keeping a diary thinking, right, did I do 5? You know, it's not about the maths. Right? So I used to teach maths when I was in school. It's not about the maths. It's not counting 5-to-1. It's making the point that the positive must be there in abundance. You know, there's got to be a rich atmosphere of intimacy, fun, respect, courtesy. You know, all of these things, these very small things. You know, you go on a, you know, your spouse has got a doctor's appointment, right, later on that day, right, 3 o'clock, and you go off to work. Send her a text, chaps. Send her a text at 4 o'clock. How did the doctor's appointment go? Rather than thinking, well, you know, she's, you know, I'll when I get back home, I'll ask, you know, I'm busy this afternoon. No, that text at 4 o'clock is going to be of infinite value compared to you strolling in at 9 or 10 o'clock that evening and saying, oh, how did it go? The doctor's appointment, right? This is the kind of rich intimacy that I'm talking about. And before I give 1 or 2 final examples with this, you know, I mean, Dr. John Gottman, very briefly, because, you know, we're running out of time. Dr. John Gottman also talks about the 4 horses of the apocalypse. And these are behaviors that are particularly harmful and can't simply be drowned out with 5-to-1 ratio. Right? So we try and avoid these 4 types of behaviors at all costs if we can. So very briefly, he talks about criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Right? So very, very briefly, you know, criticism involves attacking your partner's personality, right? So this is when you're using words like, you always do this, you never do that. I mean, those words, always and never, so loaded, because this erodes trust and makes your spouse feel attacked, really, because you're always selfish. You know, you never think about anybody but yourself. This is a destructive way of talking, right? So if your spouse does something that you're unhappy with, and you need to speak to them at the end of the day when the children are in bed and so on and so forth, talk about the particular. So the particular thing, you know, you were late and I was late as a result of you being late. I didn't get my Zoom meeting in, or whatever it might be. Not you are always this or you are never that. Because when we talk like this, we're attacking our spouse's personality, their character. And that never leads to a kind of a positive interaction. Contempt, the second one, is expressing, you know, disgust, insults, mockery, sarcasm, you know, there should be no place for sarcasm in our marriage, really, because this conveys deep disrespect. Yep. And which makes the relationship really toxic. You know, eye rolling. You know, when we eye roll, in comments like, "Oh, great, here comes the genius with another brilliant idea." You know, it's kind of sarcasm, really. This is all contempt, really. And defensiveness, denying the third one, denying responsibility, making excuses, counter-attacking. Like there's the boxing match. We had a big boxing match yesterday in the middle of the night. Boxing match. So you say this, I'm going to do that. I'm going to counter, but I'm going to counter back with even worse, higher. I mean, and so on and so forth. Back in 1973, you said this, and all the rest of it. So, we counter, and this is defensiveness, really. Stonewalling, the fourth one. And this is withdrawing from the conversation, the silent treatment, right? So where I basically ignore my spouse for half a day or for a day. She comes into the kitchen and I just ignore her, right? Because I want to express my kind of anger towards her. These four types of behaviors are really corrosive, right? Try to avoid those, really. And so what, just to begin to kind of wrap up, really, what are successful couples doing, therefore, to foster fidelity in marriage? They're talking and listening. They're talking and listening. They want to find out about each other. I mean, a great way to combine this kind of talking and listening in a busy household for me is develop this habit of this 5-minute cup of tea at the end of the day. When the kids are in bed, take time. You just say no screens, no television, nothing. I talk, you listen. You talk, I listen. 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes a day. And obviously, again, let's not worry about the maths, whether it's 10 minutes or whatever. But the point here is just, it doesn't have to be a long period of time. I cannot stress enough the importance of talking and listening to each other in that way. We need to make time. We need to make time. Somebody once said, how do you spell the word love? Right? How do you spell the word love? You may have heard this one. You spell the word love not L-O-V-E. You spell the word love T-I-M-E. That's how you spell the word love. T-I-M-E. We need to make time for each other. Many people say to me, "Oh no, but I don't have time. I'm far too busy." No, we need to make time for our spouses, and we need to I mean, what I would strongly recommend is you have a date night every week. Every week if you can. If you can't do a date night every week, you do a date night once a month or twice a month, whatever you can do. If you can't do twice a month, you become creative and you do a date night when the kids are in bed, nice romantic dinner, candles and things like that. Never ever lose the dating mindset, whether you've been married for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. I mean, I sometimes say to couples, when you were courting, everything you did during those courtship years, everything was about, I want to win my spouse. I want to win her over. So I'm talking from the perspective of a man. And so you sprayed on that extra bit of aftershave. You wanted to, everything you did was all about winning her love, winning her heart. And then you get married and then you've won it. And then you think, well, now I see that bottle of aftershave on the side of the sink, and you think, whoa, this is running low, right? This is running low. I better not overuse it, otherwise I'm going to have to buy another bottle, right? No, spread aftershave liberally, ladies. Buy good quality perfume. The things we shouldn't. We waste money on so many different things. I mean, look, this is not a plug for aftershave and perfume, but you get what I'm saying. Really, we need to look after ourselves bodily as well. Chaps, don't let yourselves go as you get older. Really, work on that pot belly. Whatever it is, we look after ourselves and we maintain that freshness, that mindset in marriage. So even when our bodies begin to kind of go a little bit, we still look at the eyes of our spouse and see beauty and see love and wonder and awesomeness, as my word my kids would use, really. So the dating mindset, never lose it. Look, there was something else. There are a couple of other things that I was going to say, but I'm worried, Stefan, that we're running out of time. Is that right? So look, I mean, what I will say is this: the last thing, which I think I'm skipping through everything here. The last thing that I want to say, and I promise you I'll wind up, is protect your heart. Protect your heart. Yeah. Affairs, they start in the head, not in the bed. As I keep saying before, this is where, we need to change. I mean, the point I was going to make earlier on, which I won't have time to make, is cognitive awareness. Remember, your actions are often fueled by your emotions, and your emotions are fueled by your thoughts, right? Change the thought, you'll change the emotion, you'll change the action, right? I mean, there's so much more I can say about this. I'm not going to say anything, but the point here is that in your head, this is where it starts. That's adultery, right? Affairs start in the bed. That's adultery. When we know that fantasies of the heart or occasions of sin, they must be nipped in the bud. But what I'm talking about now is infidelity, minor infidelity, which can lead to big things. Here is an example of minor infidelity. So, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of a chap. So, I'm having a big problems at work. My boss has got lots of making lots of demands on me, lots of deadlines. I come home, I come through the door, kids running everywhere, noise, chaos, babies crying and so on. I want to speak to my wife at the end of the day. I went to this talk that Ciro gave about this 5-minute cup of tea at the end of the day. So I said to my wife, look, can we sit down for 5 minutes? Because I need to tell you some problems that I have. And I sit down with my wife and she falls asleep, right? Because this poor woman is so exhausted, really. And anyway, this carries on. Things are building up inside me. I'm not talking to anybody. But there's this female colleague at work, right? She works on the other side of my desk. She is so understanding. Right? She's so understanding. This woman, every time I talk about, my boss or about the pressure, she puts down her pen and she listens so attentively and with so much attention and so on. What is happening here? What is happening is that this man's emotional needs are now being met by somebody who has no right to meet those needs. No right at all. My father said to me, and this is one of the best pieces of advice that I had, never get inside a car with a married woman. When you're married, right, you don't give married women lifts home. Right? As a head, so many times I used to lose my keys and things like that. And somebody would say, well, would you like a lift home? And I'd say, no, thanks. And I'd carry on looking for them and then phone my wife very sheepishly and say, can you come pick me up? I can't find my keys. And we need to look after our hearts, because it's so easy when we are emotionally drained and tired to have somebody of the opposite sex who is not our spouse kind of address those emotional needs, really. So we need to be on our guard. Now, obviously, I'm not talking here about somebody of the opposite sex who is a close member of the family, like a brother or sister. So obviously we can talk to them, but that's it. Right. So what I would say to you is, if you are ever going through an emotionally draining time, go through this checklist. First of all, you speak to your spouse. Right? Don't think, I was no point talking to her about it. They should know me well enough by now. No. Don't expect your remember I said before, don't expect your spouse to be God, to be second guessing, to just know what's in your head, really. Don't expect that. What we do is we approach them. We do that 5-minute talk at the end of the day, and we say, look, these are the problems that I'm having. And I if you approach it properly, and if the problem is with them, you avoid those generalizations like you never, you always. Forget all of those. You talk about particulars, right? And then you talk about it and come to those compromises and so on. And then you might say, well, what if I can't speak to my wife because she's the one she's just as emotionally drained as I am? So what you do is you speak to somebody of the opposite sex who's got sort of the same sex, like a friend or a priest, somebody who's got your best interests at heart. So don't go to somebody who thinks that marriage is all about happiness, and therefore if you're not happy, walk away. We don't want to go to that friend. That's a rubbish friend to go and speak to. We need to speak to a friend who's got our best genuine long-term interests at heart, and we go and speak to that person. And also, look, Liz, tying up with your question at the beginning, is such a good one, is that we need to look after ourselves as well. One of the sections that I've skipped, you'll be glad to know, otherwise you'll be here all day, is the section on how to rest, right? So I'm not going to go through that now, but we need to look after ourselves. So if you are feeling emotionally drained, make sure that you're eating well, that you're sleeping well, that you're taking good exercise without screens. If you're going for walks, you're putting the screens away. That proper rest. Make sure that your spouse is properly resting. If you can see that she is drained with the kids, and all the rest of it, you say to her, look, sweetheart, you go next door, read a book. No screens, because screens are never going to make you rest. Go next door, read a book. I'll look after the kids. Sacrificial love. I'll make dinner this evening so you can have a rest, right? Sacrificial love. And we show by our example to our children that we put our wives first, really. Yeah. And so on. So we make sure we take care of those human, physical needs, really, because those things are important. Remember, we're body and soul unity. Yeah. Body and soul unity. And finally, I promise you, this is the forgiveness. You know, whilst fidelity in marriage is underpinned by the two becoming one flesh, once, you know, almost one soul. As I say, there are going to be these disagreements and arguments and so on, but the key is always a sincere apology. Remember, I talked about the four pillars in marriage. You know, please, thank you, sorry, and I give you my word. Really, you know, one of the great strengths or sources of strength in family life is forgiveness. You know, expressed with phrases like "I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings. Please forgive me." And children benefit so much from seeing their parents reconcile, right? And it gives them such a sense of security and hope for their own future relationships. Okay, and with that, I'll end. Yeah.
Thank you, Ciro. Wow, wonderful. What a nice ending also that you mentioned about this. The best parenting is to let our children see that the parents are struggling to love each other and to give each other. Amazing. So I wanted to check with everyone who have a question here. Please feel free to unmute yourself. We open the first Q&A, maybe 3 questions here. Please, yes. Please.
Yeah, buongiorno.
Buongiorno,
Stefan.
Alex.
Oh, grazie. Molto grande. Grazie mille, Ciro. No, I mean, I'm impressed because I got this advice like 20 years ago. But yeah, I mean, I already accidentally married 20 years ago with someone that actually is a friend of mine. So I start like maybe 40 years even before, yeah, to get to know her. So I agree with you. Friendship is one of the key things during the up and down marriage. Yeah. But the most actually challenging one, I do believe, is in especially in Europe nowadays, is having more than 2 kids. You know, like what you have done is pretty much appreciate actually. 7 kids. I do understand the situation and that things, but I think also the environment. I mean, the people around you. You know. I mean, in Indonesia, people are helping, you know, for relatives and so on. But I think in Europe, I mean, okay, in Italy, maybe a little bit okay from very close family, but not from the whole environment. Even in the church perspective, we are both Catholic. It's been I mean, inaugurated also in Assisi and so on. So I found that very challenging in that situation, and also cross culture is like in Italy more in the men's side instead of the women's side, and it's getting more work together. You know, I mean. In the sense of doing what is the right thing for, I mean, like I don't know how to cook actually, but I can do well in doing cleaning of toilets. Last but not least, I can forget. I can forgive, but not forget. Yeah. So I think that's the thing that still. I mean, she can forget, okay, but not forget in the sense of if coming back into that mistake, that I will. She always say the same. Yeah. Again, actually, I come from already a very different culture. My parents coming from different island. while actually my wife is coming from a divorced family. So actually I'm expecting also the because she come from a divorced family, so kind of already kind of what we call it, more have a low appreciation. Actually my wife is quite like what you said before, very much paying to attention to the unity and so on, even though our marriage also have a up and down. So it doesn't mean that you come from a divorced family, then she will have the same experience as what is in the family. That's all, and thank you so much, Ciro. I hope we can meet somewhere each other. I live in Rimini, actually, Bologna, but my wife is from Bologna.
Okay.
Grazie mille, arrivederci,
It's a
buonasera.
pleasure. Thank you very much, Alex, for sharing that. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. Any other comments, inputs, questions? Have one more. All right.
I did see there was somebody just in the chat said to remind again what the purpose of marriage is.
Yes.
So just very briefly, remember those three elements. So marriage is a lifelong communion between a husband and a wife by their free consent. So free consent is important, really, because what sometimes people get married and it's not free. There's pressure from the family or there's pressure on themselves. Sometimes you get people who enter their mid-30s, late 30s. They're not married. They feel this pressure to get married, and they end up kind of marrying somebody who isn't the right person for them. That isn't free consent either. Right? So it's got to be by their free consent. And thirdly, for the purpose of marriage is the generation and education of children.
Yes, I think we haven't touched much also on the third point, Ciro, but I think this is excellent. That means we still have to absorb your brain and your heart in the next series, probably, if you don't mind. And we'll love to have you again, because this is such a wide spectrum of issue that we have in marriage. I mean, it's impossible to cover the lifelong marriage in 1 of hours talks, but if I can probably comment a bit here, it seems to be an understanding from what you presented, especially on towards the last topics, is that the issue of marriage is more of not that the love is no longer present between the two of them, the husband and wife, but probably more of the behavioral issues. These four bad behaviors that I think I've seen in a lot of my friends, married friends, and even in my own marriage experience, this word of criticisms, contempt, lack of respect, and very defensive. We think that marriage is about winning something and losing about other things. It's like a football or Chelsea against Liverpool. It's not like that. And that's stonewalling, which is we just fed up. I just stonewalling. I just keep silent. So I think it's more a behavior. And I see this not only from the men's side, but from the women's side. And I think we have to go back into what you have mentioned about the four, to have a civilized marriage, which is thank you, I'm sorry, please, and I will keep my words. I think that's our, let's make the word more civilized. Let's say the word of marriage more civilized. Marriage is, there's no perfect marriage. It's a long enduring marriage. But as you mentioned, the goal is very clear, to make each other holy and reach the destiny, which is to see each other in the house of our Lord.
Yes, Stefan, I just to kind of add to that, because I think these are all really important insights that you've mentioned, is this, who do I identify as, right? Who do I identify as in my marriage, right? So in other words, that's far more important than what happens and your failings, actually, really. Because if I identify as a husband or a wife who sees themselves as a child of God and wants to develop, and has got the best long-term interest of my spouse at heart, so if that is my identity as a husband or wife, then don't worry if you make mistakes from time to time. That doesn't matter. I mean, the whole point of the 5-to-1 ratio is that we can, kind of make up, from with 5 positives to that 1 negative. The issue for me isn't people's failings and their falls. It's who do they identify as. So the thing is, if I identify, so as a man, I identify I'm going to be a traditional male, or what I consider to be a traditional male. I'm the boss of the family. People do in this house what I say. So whatever I say goes. So I identify as an authoritarian father, authoritarian husband. Then everything that I'm going to say and do is going to be an overflow of that mentality, of that identity, right? And so this is not about clever strategies. It's not about clever techniques or anything like that. Fundamentally, what I've been trying to kind of, and successfully or not successfully, I don't know, but to try and get across today is who do you identify as, right? Who do you identify as? Do you identify with those, that definition of marriage? Do you identify with yourself as a child of God? Do you identify somebody who's leading your spouse to heaven and your children? Do you identify that way? Because if you do, then whatever mistakes you make, it doesn't matter, because you will always be, you'll always be, kind of disposed to coming back to that identity and making up for any mistakes that you've made, right? So that is the identifying is a conscious decision. That's an act of the will, and that's something that not even God can force you to do. I mean, because God respects your freedom. So if anybody here is listening to this morning or this evening, this afternoon, and thinking, I don't want to identify as the kind of person that Ciro is talking about. I want to remain, identified as a person, as a father, as a husband, that I've developed over, this identity over the past X many years or whatever. Not even God can change your mind, right? This has to be an act of free will. It has to be an act of free will where I freely choose to identify as the person that along the lines that hopefully I've kind of outlined as well as I can this morning, really. So so have go away. I would say go with your wife, go on a date night, and share with each other. Sorry, just one practical thing that I say to couples in terms of developing their friendship. Go away together and you write before the date night, write down what your hopes and values and aspirations and dreams are for your marriage for the next 5 years or so, right? And talk about those things, because I find that people, they talk about their deep, their values and their aspirations and their ambitions and their desires when they're courting. They get married, start having kids, and they haven't got a clue. 5 years down the track, they haven't got a clue what the other person's really thinking about. We're just getting on with day-to-day life, really. You need to step back, and friendship, true friendship, means knowing what the other person is thinking in terms of the things that matter to them the most. Do you know that of your spouse? I'm going to ask you this question now, looking straight into the camera, straight into your eyes. Do you know the desires of your spouse? Do you know them? Get them to write it down if they're saying, talk about it, really. Identify as that kind of person, and then all the other things start to look after themselves, and don't worry if you make mistakes.
And I remember a friend told me that you in a marriage you can't change your spouse, but you can change yourself for the better.
Yes, exactly.
That's ring very, very true. So Ciro, this has been a wonderful evening for myself, morning for others, and afternoon for the other part, people from the other part of the world. We have 1.5 hours, which I'm really packed with a lot of lessons learned here. I myself learned a lot from this. But thank you everyone who are joining in. We are really privileged to have this wonderful talks with Ciro. We are looking forward to have Ciro. Hopefully Ciro will not be bored with all these things. We'll try to find out another topics that is in the based on the experience of Ciro as a principal for more than 20 years and parents for 7 children, wonderful children. Congratulations for your daughter who is getting married.
Thank you.
Yes, we pray for that, and we pray for your family. And everyone's just what Ciro mentioned. Remember, have a date once a week at least. And we are on the end of the weekend. We still have times to make a date tonight or this afternoon. So thank you so much.
Listen, so Stefan, just to say as well that, look, obviously it's unlikely I would ever meet anybody in person, but just to say that the work that you're doing, which is so important, I pray for that work, and I pray for every single person and your families who joined us this morning. You'll be in my prayers, and please pray for me for the work that I do as well. Really, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ridu. All right, so with this, we'll drop off everyone, and I'm going to stop the recordings. And Ciro, if you don't mind, just share me your emails if I can share with the community here, so everyone will
of course,
get in touch with you. Thank you,
great.
and a good
bye everybody.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye bye everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.